All right, hello. This is a continuation of my summary of my analysis of how the USA is manufacturing a new Cold War with Russia. All right. So today's focus is the U.S. is falsely portraying Russia's intervention in Syria as an aggressive, expansionist threat to the Middle East. All right. So I'll first start with a little background. United States non-government organizations played a supporting role in the Arab Spring by recruiting and training leaders for the protest movements. Now, how big a role? Well, it's hard to say, right? But we played a role. But be that as it may, the Arab Spring demonstrations spread to Syria, starting the Syrian civil war in 2011. Then, after 4 years of fighting, Russia eventually intervened in September 2015. Russian military intervention is portrayed as an aggressive expansionist move in the Middle East, but again, Russia did not initiate. Russia reacted. And Russia wasn't trying to gain anything because Syria was already their client state. In fact, their sole remaining client state in the Middle East. Instead, Russia was trying not to lose its last client state in the Middle East and only naval base in the Mediterranean Sea at Tartus, making Syria strategically vital for Russia. All right. So the notion that Russia is aggressively expanding in the Middle East is crackpot fantasy, sold to the gullible American public by U.S. media and politicians. Just look at the real picture of client states in the Middle East. All right. Okay. Let's see here. So, when you see these nations underlined in red, those used to be Soviet/Russian client states. And there are 8 of them: Libya, Egypt, Lebanon, Syria, Jordan, Iraq, Kuwait, and Yemen. All right. Now, the only one Russia has left is Syria. All the rest have been flipped. All right. So if we look at Egypt, used to be Russian client state. Now it's mostly U.S. for the Army. But for Air Force and Navy, it's mixed. They buy from different people. If you look at Israel, it's dominated by the U.S. Israel makes a bunch for themselves, but it's still dominated by the U.S. And they make lesser purchases. Like I think they bought 3 German Dolphin submarines lately. Lebanon, surprisingly, is almost all U.S. Iraq, their current purchases are almost all U.S. They still have some old Soviet stuff, but the vast majority of their current purchases are U.S. We flipped it. Jordan, surprisingly, is almost all U.S. Kuwait is almost all U.S. Saudi Arabia is mostly U.S. United Arab Emirates is their army and air force is mostly U.S., but the navy is mostly French. Oman, mostly U.S. and British, UK. Qatar is a mix. They buy French, U.S., German, and Turkey. Yemen is mostly U.S. and Iran, U.S. via Saudi Arabia. However, this has changed. Recently, Biden announced that he is cutting off supply of arms via Saudi Arabia to Yemen. All right, so this has changed. U.S. is not doing this anymore. All right. Well, yeah, you can see all these have been flipped. So, summary of the 14 Middle East nations noted in the picture here, all right, 8 used to be Soviet Russian client states, making an 8-to-6 ratio. Now the balance is 1-to-10. All they got left is Syria. They're not expanding. Are you kidding me? They're trying to hang on to the last little piece and they're losing that. All right, this is Syria. All right, this is the Syrian government part, which is allied with Russia. It's just a fraction, maybe a little over, maybe about a half, I'd say. Right. A key point is Tartus, right there, naval base. This is Russia's last client state in the Middle East, and it's not even a whole client state anymore. Syria's a mess. All right, that's all they got, a mess, a part of a mess. Now the balance is 1-10. Right now that doesn't have to 14 because Libya is a special case. After the war for Libyan independence from Gaddafi, which we supported, we military supported that. Libya is a mess. It's a failed state. You know, fractured warlords. Right? They get weapons from everywhere. UAE is a big supplier. A lot of U.S. weapons coming from UAE there. Egypt, Saudi Arabia, Jordan, Russia, Turkey, Germany. They're all, right? Yemen's a case I already explained a little bit. Iran is a special case too because it used to be a U.S. client state when the Shah was in power, but the U.S. was totally cut off after the 1979 Iranian Revolution, and that's shown in this picture here. All right. So Iran was a client state. I'm not sure the dates here. It's hard to see. That's 70. So really, that's 50. So really, this is when the coup was, where we overthrew the Iranian democracy and installed a dictator, the Shah, and they're buying weapons, right? And this is 60s, 60s coming along, right? And then you got 70s, right around here. This is about the oil shock time, right? And notice with the oil shock, Iranian weapons purchases went through the roof. Now, I read testimony by Nixon administration officials, Secretary of Treasury, Secretary of Commerce, before Congress, and they're saying they're testifying in support of Iranian, this big buildup of Iranian weapons exports to Iran, saying we need this to balance trade. This is for our economy. This is for currency values, right? So this big supply here, you know, in large part, not solely, but in large part, this was due to the oil embargo and the massive jump in oil price, which whacked the balance of trade. And this is how we compensated, pumping out weapons. And then the Iranian Revolution came along, and U.S. is cut off. But then look after that. Iran doesn't buy much weapons, right? This is some other nations. This is China. Buys some China. Buys a little Russia. It's up and down, right? After the UN sanctions, bam, nothing, right? So Iran pretty much relies upon itself. It's got its own military industrial complex, although it's crappy, right? They make some crappy weapons. All right. I mean, their best fighter is like a knockoff version of the old Northrop F5. All right. So the U.S. is aggressively expanding in the Middle East, not Russia. We're flipping client states like Iraq. And don't forget that in 2001, the Bush administration had a plan to overthrow the governments of 7 Russian client states in 5 years. Iraq, Iran, Libya, Syria, Somalia, Sudan, Lebanon. Now that's according to General Wesley Clark. He was a 4-star general, the supreme commander of NATO. Right? He gave this testimony. He ran across this plan personally in the Pentagon after he retired when he made a visit. I'll explain that later in a second. So U.S. politicians and U.S. media portray Russia's actions in Syria as aggressive expansionism, but they don't look at the real picture of the United States' history of flipping client states. Russia's not expanding in the Middle East. They're trying to hang on to the last remaining bone, last remaining tidbit, right? And the U.S. media and politicians don't bat an eye at the fact that the United States the Bush administration manipulated Congress and the public to manufacture a bloody, long war in Iraq for trumped up, bogus reasons, causing one, massive death and destruction. Right? I mean, it's not. I mean, a lot of American boys died, over 4,000, right? But far more Iraqis and Iraqi civilians died, and it radicalized the Arab masses, pissed off a lot of the Arab masses, multiplying the terrorist threat. It caused the formation of ISIS. You know, honestly, it caused the formation of Al Qaeda in Iraq. Prior to our invasion, Al Qaeda in Iraq was pretty much non-existent. There was only a small group related to Al Qaeda in Iraq in northern Kurdish Iraq, which was off limits to Saddam and the Iraqi military. In fact, he was trying to infiltrate them and get intelligence on them. That was protected by UN/US no-fly zone. After we invaded, that's when people swarmed in. We made Al Qaeda in Iraq, which then transformed into ISIS. Exacerbation of the Sunni-Shia conflict, and that's Arab on Arab conflict. Destabilization of the Middle East with formation of a Shia bloc, which increased threat to Sunni nations. All right, so here's pretty much the Middle East, most of it. Here's Iran, here's Iraq, here's Syria. Traditionally, the two Sunni nations have been Iran and Syria. Syria is not really Shia. It's Alawite, which is a branch of Shia. Iran is Shia. All right, so they're allied because they're both really Shia. Right now, Iraq, after we invaded, it's flipped to Shia because the majority population is Shia. So now you got a Shia bloc. All right, and here's an example of how that can be a strategic threat to the Sunnis. All right, most of Iran's oil fields are right here. All right, they ship it out through tankers. All right, now if they build a pipeline through now Shia-protected Iraq into Shia Syria to the Mediterranean, that's a major strategic threat to the Sunni nations. That's big money for Iran. All right, and that's probably one of the reasons why Syria is up for grabs. And Syria is a big proxy war now for, Saudi Arabia and Qatar supporting it, Iran supporting it, right? Proxy fight in Syria. Part of what makes it a big mess. I mean, there's a lot to what makes Syria a big mess. All right. So we made that. We made that possible. And don't forget how the Bush administration manipulated the U.S. Congress and public into the war. All right? This was a total manufactured lie. So this is my introduction to my analysis of how the Bush administration manipulated the U.S. Congress and public into the war. It's just an abbreviated summary. And summaries are always watered-down versions that cannot capture all the details. All right? So, keep in mind, this is just watered down. All right? So the first thing I want you to look at is the fact that there's a timeline here. This is 9/11 when the attacks occurred. The key date is the anniversary of 9/11 because this kicked off the scheme to manipulate the U.S. public into a war, a new war. So the leverage that they used was the November election, but the goal was to get a war in Iraq. And they would get a war in Iraq by getting a resolution. A congressional resolution authorizing the president to use military force is almost just as good as a declaration of war from Congress. You can do just about every damn thing. You can fight any size war as long as you want. The only restrictions are little things on foreign trade. The president's got a little bit more power to control transportation in the country. Manufacturing. I mean, you don't even need a war for this. The president's got that power, like to manufacture COVID vaccine, right? Hey, you get your ass in gear. Go make this COVID vaccine under license from AstraZeneca or Pfizer or whatever. You can do stuff with communications. That's it. Everything you could do anything else with a congressional resolution for a war. Fight as big a war as you want, as long as you want. Right? And that's been done 3 times in our history. History repeats itself. Why? Because our elected officials are too stupid to know what's going on, to remember history. Spanish-American War, Vietnam War, Iraq Invasion War, all used clever ways to get a congressional resolution to get a war. So, to explain this, the first thing you got to know are these letters. P stands for planning to use the attack by Al-Qaeda, not Iraq, Al-Qaeda attack, to get an attack on Iraq. Right? F is jacking up fear. This is the big fear blitz, the big fear campaign. Fear, fear, fear every damn day. R is when we started pushing for a resolution. Right? The resolution there is the legal basis for war, but they sold it as, oh, it's going to keep you safe. They build up all this fear, 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 and then they say the thing to keep you safe is going to be this resolution. But in reality, this is their hot little ticket to war. Right? As soon as you get this, you got a war. Even though they sell it euphemistically. Oh, this is just to keep us safe. Don't worry about it. Right? And again, 3rd time in our history this has been done. People don't learn. People don't remember. Done over and over. All right, so first thing I want to point to is, you see, the fear campaign began here August 26th. But a key point was right here. This is September 7th. A couple days before 9/11. A few days before 9/11. So on September 7th, a Bush administration official blabbed to the press, quote, "We're using a meticulously planned strategy." That's what they called it. A meticulously planned strategy to persuade the public, the Congress, and the allies of the need to confront the threat of Saddam Hussein. In the end, it will be difficult for someone to vote against it. The Iraq War resolution is what we were talking about. That's your ticket to war. The administration official said, unquote. Right? Okay. So, the first thing that's involved in it is a bait and switch. And they used the 1-year anniversary as the time to launch their bait and switch, where they had a blitz of fear campaign, time with the 1-year anniversary of 9/11. Why? Because on that anniversary, everyone remembers the term 9/11, the date that it happened. And there were 36 television programs reliving the horror of that day. Planes flying into buildings, right? People jumping out of buildings from this high because they'd rather die, from a fall than burn to death alive, right? I mean, it was horrifying. So all that fear is reactivated on this day. So that fear is heightened. And then you pump up that fear, right? They're saying stuff like this. Taking time bad. Time is short, right? There's no time. Before we know it, Iraq's going to have a nuclear bomb. Then the horrors of 9/11 are going to be multiplied thousands of times over. It'll be far worse with weapons of mass destruction. They said here, right about 9/9, right? Intelligence report released. Iran may have a nuclear weapon in a matter of months. Bullshit. Iraq had no nuclear weapons program. But, they pumped out crap like that. So I'm not going to go into all the details, but they said crap like, oh, you don't want a mushroom cloud for a smoking gun, right? A nuclear weapon's gone off and it's too late already. Right? They're pumping up fear every damn day. Fear, fear, fear. Each time they pumped up fear, multiple times each day. And then in the midst of that, they started saying, oh, we need this resolution to keep us safe. And the leverage here, the backboard, was November election, right? And they want to get this resolution, so they put the resolution vote right after this big fear campaign, right after it. Right? Immediately after the big fear campaign, they put the resolution vote, which is right before Congress left to go back home to spend the last 3 weeks of campaigning for the election. This is a critical time. This is a crunch time. This is when you win or lose the election. Right? So they put the vote here. Now, with all this fear, with all this hysteria, and with the resolution being a thing to keep us safe, if you vote against that right here, you just committed political suicide in the November election. All right? Your opponent can eat you alive, can crucify you. Oh, he's a terrorist lover. He's soft on terror. He's some liberal, goofy, wacky, extreme, commie liberal. All right? He's un-American. He's unpatriotic. Right? Whatever. They kill you, right? He doesn't care about your life, right? He cares more about protecting terrorists or some crap like that. All right, so that's how they got it. That's their meticulously planned strategy, and it worked. They timed it with the 1-year anniversary, timed it with the election. They forced the vote here. Bush administration officials pushed hard to get the vote right before the recess. And then, here's Richard Clarke, right? He was the anti-terrorist czar in both the Clinton administration and the Bush administration. He's at ground zero. He's in the White House when the planes hit, right? And he said, day one, Rumsfeld and Wolfowitz on day one were pushing hard to use this attack by Al-Qaeda to promote their agenda against Iraq. And what he said was, I got a sharp physical pain. That's his words, word for word. When he realized that Wolfowitz, Rumsfeld are trying to use this national tragedy, he said, to promote their agenda against Iraq. They knew it was Al-Qaeda, but they're going to use it to attack Iraq, to manufacture war against Iraq. And the public fell for it. Right? Then day two, that's when Bush is pushing it. He ordered Clarke to find evidence to pin this on Iraq. And then this is the day when General Wesley Clark, do I have him here? Yeah. General Wesley Clark, he visited the Pentagon, right? And he learned that the U.S. has plans to invade Iraq right here. I mean, it was only 10 days after the attack. 10 days after the attack, we're planning on invading Iraq. Plan out. Then he goes back 6 weeks later, right about here, right? Runs into the same general, a general who used to be his subordinate, right? When Wesley Clark was Supreme Commander of NATO, one general was a subordinate. He runs into the same guy and he asks him, oh, so are we still planning on invading Iraq? Right? Right? For no reason. That's what they found out here. There's no reason why we're invading Iraq. Right? The general tells him, oh, sir, it's worse than that. And he pulls out a piece of paper and says, I just got this memo. We got a plan in the Department of Defense to overthrow the governments of 7 nations, all Soviet Russian client states, in 5 years. Right? We're going to overthrow these nations. Iraq, Iran, Libya, Syria, Sudan, Somalia, Lebanon. Right? And we overthrew a couple of them. All right. So he went on further, said, this is what Richard Clarke said. And recall, he's the anti-terror czar in both the Clinton and Bush administration. He said that for the USA to go and invade Iraq because Al-Qaeda attacked us on 9/11 is like the USA invading Mexico because the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor, right? So it's like two guys, way back in December 8th, day after Pearl Harbor, Hey, did you hear the Japs bomb Pearl Harbor? No. Damn, that's crazy. Hey, what do you think we ought to do about it? I don't know. Oh, I know. Let's go invade Mexico. That's a good idea. Like the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor. Oh, damn. Let's go invade Mexico. That's what he said is like. And everyone bought it. And don't forget, the USA invasion of Iraq War is only one example in the long history of dirty conflict creating things we've done in the Middle East. Now, I've taught you that history lesson many times. I've taught it, I don't know how many times in my sociology classes, and I've made so many damn lectures on it. Probably half dozen videos on it. Probably half dozen video series of it, right? Although I know the masses retain zero. If I ask anyone, boom, zero in their heads. All the masses ever have in their heads is whatever diversionary sideshow, it's simple and stupid, being currently waved in front of their face in social reality, social media, especially my own private social media network, to shift focus off of the facts and intelligent analysis to manipulate their perceptions, usually by an ad hominem attack, attacking my credibility, never addressing a single fact, right? So that's a game the CIOs play. They play games to attack your credibility, right? They screw with you one way or another, right? And then when you complain, attack your credibility. And that's all people know. He's unbelievable. He's crazy. So damn easy to do. People fall for that all the time. So I want to review the map here. Russia's not expanding in the Middle East. Russia's contracting. All these nations they lost. They only got a fraction of Syria left. Not even all Syria, just a fraction. Russia is not expanding in Syria. Russia already had Syria and is trying to hang on. And they lost half of it. Its sole remaining client state in the Middle East. And only naval base in the Mediterranean Sea at Tartus, right about there. The U.S. is aggressively expanding in the Middle East, overthrowing countries like Iraq, while increasing the terrorist threat, including spawning ISIS. Oh, that's a good job. Good job. Exacerbating the Sunni-Shia conflict. Oh, good job. Way to go. And destabilizing the Middle East, especially with the formation of a Shia bloc. Oh, good job. No doubt a big reason why Syria is up for grabs. Why it's a proxy war, especially between the Sunnis and the Shia. So here's a summary of this section. Russia's intervention in Syria is being portrayed as greedy, rapacious, aggressive expansionism, painting a picture of Russia as a dangerous threat. And this threat is being used to fuel a Cold War, a new war, right? A shift from anti-terrorism back to great power conflict, which is an arms race. But Russia is not expanding in the Middle East. Russia is contracting. Russia did not initiate in Syria. Russia is reacting. Russia is not trying to gain something in the Middle East. Russia is trying not to lose its sole remaining client state in the Middle East, and only Mediterranean naval base, which is strategic. Once again, Russia is being shoved back onto its heels, being pushed around. Russia's being jerked around. Why? Because Russia's weak. The U.S. is expanding in the Middle East, flipping client states, with a plan to overthrow the governments of 7 Soviet Russian client states in 5 years. Right? That goes back to 2001. The U.S. media and politicians never mention that, right? They don't mention that we're the ones expanding in the Middle East. It is a proverbial pointing out the twig in someone else's eye when there's a big ass massive log jammed into your own eye, and you would totally ignore that. Like, what? There's nothing. It's like the knight in Monty Python and the Holy Grail. Gets his arm cut off. Hey, your arm's cut off. No, it's not. Yeah, it is. No, it's not. Yeah, it is. What, that? Oh, that's just a flesh wound. Then he gets his other arm cut off. Then his legs. No, they're not cut off. I mean, it's like wacky denial. It is a classic case of self-serving bias, right? Which is human nature. This is what humans do. They serve self. People are driven to support and serve self, and they bias the crap out of things. The U.S. recently manufactured an ungodly, totally unjustified Iraq invasion war with massive killing and destruction, creating all sorts of other problems like increasing the terrorist threat, including the formation of ISIS, exacerbating sectarian conflict, destabilizing the Middle East. But politicians and the media never mentioned that. There was never any WMD. In fact, the U.S. CIA played all sorts of dirty games during the 7 years of WMD inspections between 1991 and 98. I tell you what, I've taught this many times. From Scott Ritter's book, the lead inspector on the ground during those inspections, working directly with the CIA, being screwed by the CIA, having his inspections blocked and undermined by the CIA, having the CIA try to play dirty games with the inspections. Read his book. Try to remember something. There was no tie with Al-Qaeda. In fact, the 2006 Senate intelligence report stated that Saddam was actually hunting down the Al-Qaeda radicals because they threatened overthrow of the Iraq government with their plans to establish a caliphate. In fact, Richard Clarke, in his book, right here, Against All Enemies, probably the first 17 pages or so, somewhere in there, he said, the number one priority of these fundamentalists, right, the right-wing, radical, Islamic extremists like Al-Qaeda, their goal is not to attack the U.S. Their number one goal is to create their caliphate religious state, right? And to do that, they got to overthrow a Middle East government. So they threatened to overthrow the Iraq government. They threatened to overthrow Saddam Hussein. So he's hunting them down. Now, no one considers the fact that the U.S. is the greatest warmongering nation in recent history, hands down, fighting 677 war years in 244 years, for an average of 2.77 wars every damn year of our existence. And with few exceptions, our wars have been expansionist wars for resources, territory, and economics. People don't honestly examine real historical facts. They just believe the baseless crap they want to believe. They totally ignore all that the U.S. does and point the finger at Russia. Okay? And Russia's just scrambling to hang on to one thing. They're not trying to expand. We scream about Russian military intervention in Syria when no one intervenes militarily more than the USA. So I got a list of U.S. military interventions. Let's see here. Here's the list. Wait, that's not it. All right, here's the list. I mean, it goes on and on and on. We're always fighting little conflicts. We're always intervening here and there. I mean, I'm not going to go through each and every one of these. It's nonstop. I showed you that chronological list of all the damn wars we fought. Multiple wars every damn year. Sometimes up to 7 or 8 wars in a single year. All right. All right. So, lastly, I'm not saying Russia's good, right? Putin's a tricky bastard. I'm saying Russia is weak and retreating, being shoved back at every point. But Russia is being exaggerated as a big, scary threat to drive a shift, a U.S. national security priority from anti terrorism to great power conflict. That's the new thing. The war on terror is fizzling out. We're shifting it back to great power conflict, which is the new Cold War. And that's going to be a moneymaker. All right. That's it for that.